Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having me here. I recently learned that a fear of public speaking is hereditary. So I wrote a haiku for this occasion. Public speaking fear. This will be cathartic, right? Collective deep breath. So please. One more time. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, my name is Nikki DeFeo. No, I'm not made of ice cream and sprinkles, even though my daughter would love that. I'm a writer, a designer, a dreamer, and an inventor. Less than a year ago, I learned something that changed my life. It completely made me rethink my roots and the stuff that makes me who I am. So I'll start with who I am. Since I was a child, I couldn't stop thinking of ideas. I started a fashion company when I was 8 and ended up destroying my parents' basement by spraying puffy paint all over the ceiling. My mom was constantly helping me clean up my messes so my dad didn't find out. And this was partly because I ruined a lot of furniture and partly because he didn't totally get art or being artsy. But more on that later. I forced my husband and my daughter to wear extravagant Halloween costumes that I sometimes make by hand with a hot glue gun, spray paint, and paper mache. I made that teacup in a really tiny apartment, and I made a huge mess. And my husband helps me clean up my messes too. It was a total disaster, and I'm sorry to him. I think when we moved in together, my mom actually said, no backsies. I've written 4 novels, some of which will never be read by anyone ever, some of which only my mom will read, probably. When it was sports day at my daughter's school, I painted this pretty rad soccer ball on her shirt, only to find out that every single other person in this town has professional Patriots gear that they dress their kids up in. So she totally stood out. And I paint for fun on Friday nights, especially chickens. I just like to. I tell you all this because being creative is who I am. It's the air I breathe. I need it to exist. And I think I was born this way. I've realized our kid is the same as me. For a long time, I assumed that she was creative or artsy because I forced her to be this way. But now I'm not so sure. It's a question I think about a lot lately. What is nature and what is nurture? What are we inherently born with and what is taught or socialized? When I see our daughter making creations out of nothing, I have to believe it's just in her DNA. All right, so back to my roots. I was conceived in Allentown, Pennsylvania in 1979. You can do the math on that. In case you didn't know, Allentown is the home of the very famous Yakko's hot dogs, which are pretty gross, honestly. They're gross. And of course, it was made infamous by the Billy Joel song, Allentown. My parents had a really hard time getting pregnant. They went through a lot of fertility treatments, and this was in the 70s. And when nothing worked, they finally decided to adopt a baby boy. But a week before the adoption was supposed to go through, the mom decided to keep the baby. So they were devastated, of course. I know from what my parents told me that all they wanted was to have a baby, and they tried for a really long time. So the next part was a story I probably heard a million times growing up. About a week, so after the adoption fell through, my mom got pregnant. And 9 glorious months later, I was born, which was great. She called me her miracle baby. And then 2 years after that, my sister Heather was born. There wasn't any real folklore about Heather. It was just that she got pregnant again and had another baby. Sorry, Heather. This is our very simple family tree. We have a mom, dad, me, my sister. Real pictures. And then my mom has 5 brothers and sisters. They all have a bunch of kids. My dad has 2 sisters, 2 half-sisters. They all have a lot of kids. This is not the complicated part, though, of my story at all, even though it looks like it. My mom is Irish. My dad is Italian. So it made sense that I have really fair skin and Heather has dark olive skin. I always had really dark hair, almost black, and Heather has blondish hair. I have blue eyes, she has green eyes. But our differences didn't end there. I was loud, verging on obnoxious as a kid. I was social, but always felt kind of misunderstood. Heather was quieter and really sweet and more reserved. In fact, we are so different, and always were, that it was a topic of conversation for as long as I could remember. Our dad also treated us really differently. He was harder on me, and he always wanted me to get perfect grades. He coddled Heather. He kind of wanted to put her in a bubble, like one of these. And as we grew older, I became more rebellious, and she kind of stuck more to her comfort zone. Even though I look so much like my mom, we have the same freckles in the same places, I did have some of my dad's qualities. We were both really hard workers. We're both really competitive. We both talked very loudly, especially when I was growing up. We both wanted to be heard all the time. But sometimes I think because of this, we didn't get along. And sometimes I don't think he understood me really at all. There were even times when I caught him staring at me as if he was trying to figure me out. It felt like we kind of stood on opposite ends of the earth on pretty much every single topic. And so sometimes we had to shout at each other to be heard. He wanted me to be a doctor like him. I wanted to be an artist. He didn't really want me to experience very much, and I wanted to experience everything. He surrounded himself with people just like him, and I wanted to meet everyone who was different than me. And still, to this day, we're on opposite sides of most things, politically especially, socially, and just culturally. It's always been a puzzle to me how I could be so different from one of my parents. All right, so I left for college when I was 18, and shortly after my parents got divorced. I had made a decision though, even though I didn't really know it at the time, but I was not going back to Allentown to live. I started gathering friends who loved me and who really accepted me. I stuffed them in my pockets, and they became my family of sorts. I moved to New York City in May 2012, which was right after September 11th. So it was kind of scary to live there. And also there were no jobs for creative people like me. So I shared a cell phone with one of my friends. But even though it was really one of the hardest times of my life, I finally felt like I belonged somewhere, which was awesome. All right, so 7 years ago, I got married and had a kid. And then for 2.5 years, I pushed this kid through ice and snow in New York City. Carried her down subway stairs. Over 3 years ago, we moved to Portsmouth, and 1 year and 1 month ago, my mom and sister came to stay with us for Christmas. So I had no idea what presents to get them for Christmas, so I ended up, like on a whim, purchasing 3 at-home DNA kits. One was for Heather, one was for my mom, and one was for my dad, and I mailed it home to Pennsylvania to reach him in time. And my mother-in-law knew what I was doing, so she got one for me. So I thought this was going to be really fun, because I had seen all the commercials. You see the commercials, it looks fun. Okay, so I wanted to find out how much Irish I was and how much Italian I was, because my dad really prides himself in being Italian. My mom's last name is O'Brien. I mean, we thought this would be cool. I also thought it could connect the 4 of us, because we had, there was distance separating us, and I thought I would find some cool ancestors in a remote village in Italy or something. So my dad gave his kit to his new wife. I was upset, but I was determined to find out something about my roots. Heather, my mom, and I sent our kits in, and Heather and I got our results back on the same day. I was so busy the morning that our results popped up in the mail, in my email. So the thing I was most concerned about, or most interested in, was they have the health information. So I was checking the health information, and I wasn't a carrier for anything. So I took my daughter to school, I dropped her off, and then I pulled in the driveway and saw that Heather had sent me and our mom a screenshot of her results. She had texted it to us. It said that we had 2 half siblings. So my heart was pounding, I was kind of freaking out. So I pulled my results up again, but this time I looked at the ancestry part and I did not have the same 2 half siblings. And it said that Heather was my half sibling. So I wrote, "It says Heather is my half sibling," to my mom and sister. And then my mom wrote back and said, "I think we should have a conference call tonight," which she's never said that before. So of course I called her right away. So I don't really think I've told you about my relationship with my mom, but we talk almost every day. I've told her everything, like when I tried a cigarette for the first time, and when I got a tattoo when I was 15, because my dad said I shouldn't. She's been there for me even in my worst times, but in this moment I sat on the other end of the phone from what I felt like was a stranger. She was crying, and finally she said, "We used 2 different sperm donors, for you and for Heather." I never told you about that. So in case you don't know how sperm donation worked in the 70s and 80s, basically the OBGYN asked some medical residents or interns at the hospital if they wanted to donate, and then they said cool, because science and because they could earn a couple $100. And then my parents paid them in cash. So sperm banks were not a huge thing back then, and I know this because I'm in Facebook support groups that, and a lot of people have almost the same story as me. Their dads were residents or interns, or their bio dads, who donated at the time. So it's really like a story that I've heard over and over again. So my parents' doctor told that they would tell the dad, "It's most likely yours. We're going to mix it all together, and it's probably going to be your baby." But my parents have been trying to have a baby for a really long time, and they got pregnant the first time when they did this procedure. So on that day, my parents promised each other that no matter what, they would never, ever tell anybody about this. It was a secret between the 2 of them only. But now we know that science is greater than secrets. And the day I decided, on a whim, because I saw a commercial, to give those DNA tests as a gift, I finally learned the truth. So it's hard to explain the feeling of finding out at the age of 39 that what I thought about my identity was totally different. I kind of remembered I don't really remember my childhood super clearly, but now things were really clicking into place. So it was hitting me that my dad was not my biological father. Heather, who is so different than me, is my half-sister, which makes a lot of sense. And then it came in waves after that. My beloved grandmother is not my biological grandma, that's her. My cousins and my aunts and my uncles are not biologically related to me, which also kind of made sense in a lot of ways. I had unknowingly lied to doctors about half my medical history. So, when you say what your mom has, what your dad has or doesn't have, could have married a half sibling. Luckily, I married someone much older than me, so it's not really possible, and who isn't from my town. I told my mom it was fine. I mean, I felt like I was comforting her through all this, and I know what it's like to want to have a baby because I'm a mom. Like, I totally get that. So, but there was this fact that my mom, who I'm closest to, probably more than anyone in the world, had lied to me or not told me the truth. So it totally rocked me. And I really struggled with putting myself in her shoes because I just felt like there were so many times where she could have told me. But then she was forced to with this DNA test. So after my mom's confession, I looked closer at my results. So I did not have the same 2 half-siblings as Heather, but I did have one of my own, a different one. It said he was male. There was no name, just 2 initials. It didn't say where he lived or how old he was. There was just a D and a W. That was it. So I wrote him a really crazy note that said, "Hey, looks like we're half siblings. I just found out I was conceived via a sperm donor. And I would love to talk to you and find out more about myself." And then I sent some equally crazy sounding messages to some 3rd to 5th cousins in their 60s, just trying to find out some info. And then I stared at a wall for a week or more. My brain had always been full of these ideas and projects and things I wanted to do. But now it was blank. So I could barely write copy for my day job. I was unable to create anything. I did not know who I was. And I kind of felt like I had lost my roots, at least half of them. So therefore, I kind of felt like I barely existed. It was just a weird feeling of like being outside myself, really. So after this first week, things got really crazy. One of my cousins, but not even one I'd reached out to, we're gonna call him Simon, said he would help me find out more about my family. So he asked me where I was conceived and if I had any other info, and I told him, Allentown Hospital, and my mom thought they used these residents at the hospital as donors. So in under 2 weeks, he sent me a name and a photo and said, "I think this is your biological father." Yeah. I don't even know if I was looking for that, but it happened. So, my favorite gift. Okay, in case you guys aren't a donor-conceived person or just found out a crazy 39-year-old secret, when you see your maybe biological father's face for the first time, it's crazy. It feels like an earthquake. I mean, it's just insane. So I did what any person with the internet might do. I looked up every possible thing I could about this person. He was a doctor, is a doctor. He had raised 3 kids of his own. But the one thing I didn't have was actual proof. I didn't have scientific proof that this was the guy. It was just what this cousin had told me. So I did another DNA kit with a different company, and my results came back in record time, like a week and a half maybe. And there, in my list of close relatives, as a half sibling, was his son, the one he had raised. So, yeah. So I had my proof, obviously. The son he's much younger than me. He's in his 20s. So I felt like it kind of wasn't fair to reach out to him. I didn't feel, even though he could see me on the site. So I felt like if I was going to reach out to anyone, it would be my biological dad. So the next couple events happened in several weeks' time. All of this happened very fast. So I found my bio dad's home address. His son promptly, probably like 4 days, about the time when the mail would have arrived, his son disappeared from the DNA site. So I wrote him a letter. The son disappeared from the DNA site. And I felt just totally rejected. I mean, I felt awful. I don't even know why I felt that awful, but I just felt devastated and totally rejected. But then I got a phone call. So probably a week after I sent this letter, I got this phone call. And it was my bio dad's brother. We're going to call him Uncle Alvin. We talked for an hour, and he said that bio dad was shocked and that he was just not ready to deal with this situation at all. But Uncle Alvin thought I was wonderful. So he told me about their family in great detail he talked like we were family, which was crazy. He talked about my cousins and my half-siblings and my biological grandmother and grandfather. And then he told me all about my medical history. And it was totally wild, like the whole conversation. I wish I had recorded it because I was just like in shock the whole time. But when we hung up for the first time, I felt kind of this sense of peace. I had some answers. I felt like I had a little bit of closure. But then things got crazier, if you can believe that. So my message to my half-brother, DW, had sat unanswered for months and months. Then one day in June, Father's Day to be exact, ironically, he wrote me back. And he was super confused. And he was pretty cautious and I was too, because I could be a crazy person and he could be a crazy person. Like we didn't know each other at all. But then we started exchanging messages, and I was the person who broke it to him that he was donor conceived as well. Like he didn't know. So we got there over time. And then we decided to connect on Facebook. And then I connected with his wife, who had a ton of questions and who is amazing. Then we shared pictures of us as kids, which was crazy. And then we talked on the phone. So he has two sisters as well. So he asked them to each do a DNA kit. And you remember this because it'll come up later. But I was really nervous to tell him that I had found our bio dad because I felt this weird loyalty. I almost felt like it would ruin it if now there are two of us. So if the bio dad wanted to connect, I felt like now I'm going in with another person. I felt like this weird loyalty about telling DW all the information that I had found out. So I called Uncle Alvin, and he said, "Wonderful. I hope there's more." Then he said, "Give me DW's phone number. I'd like to give him a call," and he did. And they've talked several times. We've talked a lot to Uncle Alvin. So I realize I haven't mentioned Heather in a while, so here's her very brief story. She has two half-siblings on the one DNA site and then found 4 more on the other. And because now I'm obviously an expert at finding biodads, I found hers, and he has 4 kids he has raised. So she reached out to him as well, and he told her about a genetic mutation that he has, and she got tested and she has it. She should have been tested and screened years ago. And in case you're wondering why it's important to know your biological roots, Heather's it. Meanwhile, DW's sisters did the DNA test and confirmed that none of them share a biological father. And one of DW's sisters is Heather's half-sister. So, ready? My half-brother's sister, who he grew up with, is half-sisters with my half-sister, who I grew up with. Do you get it? Do you need me to do it again? Yeah. It's a small town. When I was very young, I told my parents that I wanted an older brother. Looking back, this seemed like a silly little kid thing to say, especially because I was the oldest kid in my family. But I realize now that nothing is impossible. In September, my half-brother DW and his wife came to Portsmouth to visit. We're at Pepperell Cove. And in case you've never met your half-brother in person for the first time at the age of 39, it was literally like meeting a version of myself. When I was a kid, I felt really loosely tethered to my roots. When I got the DNA results, I felt like I had unraveled completely. But discovering the truth has made me feel more like myself than I ever did before. I'm back to obsessively creating. I'm writing a new novel. I don't care if I got all this creative stuff from my genes. It's what makes me who I am. At times, this journey has left me feeling sad and alone, excited and terrified to learn more information, which we probably will. It's made me angry because I believe everyone has the right to know their DNA and their medical history. It's made me rethink the roots I thought I was born with, the roots I discovered with every new family member, and detail about my rewritten history. But mostly it made me realize that the most important roots are the ones that you plant yourself. Your talents, your best good friends who are here, who have heard my DNA story like a million times, your partner, your kids, your extended family and kids, the experiences you choose to have, the places you decide to go. This is the stuff we're made of. So we're still totally finding out more information about who we're related to, and secrets about our family. When us donor-conceived kids get one of those emails from 23andMe or Ancestry, we freak out, and then it's like, we've updated our privacy policy or something. I think a lot of half-siblings are out there. Maybe we'll never find them, but we're ready for them. Keep checking. Family is so weird, especially mine, but family is family. And I'm grateful for this journey because I've kind of found out more of who I am, and it's exciting and crazy. Do you have any questions? I'm sure you do.